Good.
You're good.
All right. Well, thank you everyone for joining today. We are not going to kill you with PowerPoint. We're going to keep it as fast-paced as possible and try to share with you some of the approach that we've taken with customers to help them build a firewall policy lifecycle management program. You know, everyone owns firewalls. They have a SIM. They have all these different components. You know, but in the end, you have to be able to answer the questions. You know, is your firewall secure? Is it compliant? How do you know? Can you prove it? You know, do you have quick and easy access to audit information, or is it a painstaking process? You know, are your firewall policies effective? You know, are they impacting performance? Have they been optimized to eliminate unnecessary firewall policies from slowing down other network traffic? Things like that. And by having a program in place and building working groups around it, we've been able to help customers take a lot of different components and make them all work effectively to achieve the goal. So that's what we call the FPLM, or Firewall Policy Lifecycle Management Program. So from an agenda perspective, we talked a little bit about what an FPLM is. We'll talk a little bit more about it. And what we're going to do is discuss the methodology and demonstrate the technology that we use. We're going to focus on the people, process, and platform, and then we'll talk a little bit about CDA services. This will be very demo heavy. We have about 25 real slides, and most of them are fillers. And in the end, we'll get to some form of question and answer. So when you think about an FPLM program, you really have to understand the mission or the objective. You know, what is the objective? What are the deliverables, and why is it valuable to the business? So in this case, we take the approach of breaking them down into separate groups where we talk about people. We engage the customer, we build a RACI matrix, we help them understand their roles and responsibilities so there's not a whole lot of finger pointing, thereby empowering the teams to establish a working group. What are we going to do in this program? Whose roles and responsibilities are aligned to which teams? And then we map out the processes. We go through and build inventory management, standardization, and the change and configuration policies, and then obviously any reporting and compliance requirements. So not only what are the requirements, but what is the process for proving you're compliant? And then from a platform perspective, there's obviously multiple pieces. You have all of your firewalls, whether they're single vendor or multi-vendor, your SIM, your services management or ITSM. You may have your incident response or other tooling. And then maybe you even have a DevOps process or DevSecOps process. So we take all those things into account when we build the program to make sure that the inputs and outputs that affect the security organization are effectively mapped. Okay, so why would you need a program? You know, whether it's compliance, change and configuration management, some kind of IR process or incident response, just general reporting, want to understand what occurred, when, who, what, why. Maybe service management is a pain. There's a lot of change controls, a lot of processes that are associated with your organization that are just painful to maintain. Or if you're interested in automating, so security orchestration, automation and response, or just some form of enrichment to your SIM. So simplifying policy management, we'll talk more about this, but effectively building a simple policy interface. So which zones, which segments can speak to which other segments, and when they can speak, what protocols can they use? What's allowed, what's blocked, what's defined in your policy? If that currently is a 50 or 60 page document, it's going to be really difficult to implement. So what we do is we help you build a unified security policy that is integrated with your FPLM platform. So it gives you the ability to see who can talk to who on what protocols, and if there's a violation. Typically, if you have the risk management component built into the platform, that should not occur. But if there are exceptions, these will be clearly outlined in that USP. Unified security policy. We will show that in the demo. So from a demo perspective, we talked about a lot of things, right? Change and configuration management, compliance, reporting, unified security policy, and even compliance. In this case, we'll talk a little bit about PCI. So I'm going to start the first demo, and then I'm going to bring it over to Christian, who will share the USP. So what we have here is, in this case, we're using TUFA, and it could be any policy management platform. This is just the easiest for us to get access to for demos. What we have is the ability to look at change and configuration management and how it applies. So from the home screen, you get to see all of your inventory. This is my giant inventory with my 3 ASAVs. We have the ability to take a look at all these firewalls that are in our inventory, what changes have occurred? And I'll show you reporting, audit trails, everything that you would need to see. So with these 3 firewalls, you can see there's some recent changes. I can select any one of those firewalls and compare the revisions or generate a report. Comparing the revisions versus generating a report is pretty simple. We're looking at it on the console versus sending out a PDF or an email. So if I go and look at the running config, I can see on the left side, this is what it was before, this is what it was after. And as I scroll down, it'll start to identify the changes that occurred and highlight them. Now, this is a pretty basic revision. So we'll go back. So get something a little more sophisticated, maybe. Popping that out to a big screen, running configs. See all the different changes that occurred here as well, where there were other objects added to the firewall. It'll go through line by line and show you. We have additional NAT rules that were added. So there's a lot of information that's available through compare and contrast with the interface. And that's all based on the fact that we put a policy in place. We configured all these devices in the inventory, and we made sure that they were reporting effectively to the platform. So if we go back, or if we look at reporting, we can take the same report, and it's arbitrary which system it is. We can actually generate a report and have that report sent to the team, where it'll tell you that on this day, this revision occurred. It was executed by this person, this time, and this date. And these are the commands that were run. Again, this is a very simple change, but it's documented. You didn't have to go through a massive process. Later on, we'll show you how this integrates with ticketing and things like that. So aside from that, we have, Zoom is in my way, reporting. Every time a change occurs, we can have that report pushed out, whether through PDF or whatever the case may be. In this case, look at some changes that occurred here. Same deal, same information. This will be sent to management or stakeholders, whoever you have listed as the owner of that system, so they know that something changed on their system, who did it, when, and hopefully the business justification was filled out. And then last but not least, if you're going into administration and you want to understand not only who made changes on the firewall, but who has access to your FPLM platform, and what were they doing and why were they doing it. So you have a full audit trail of that information. So with that, I'll switch over to Christian, and he will show you the unified security policy and how we take that paper document and turn it into a very usable and referenceable piece of information to facilitate your FPLM program. Basically, take that paper and turn it into something usable, mapping zone-to-zone communication, allowed block protocols, and violations for risk management.
All right. So, can you see my screen?
Yes.
So here we have the unified security policy. It's based off of a PCI compliance. Essentially what we have here is there are a couple different color blocks. We have a block all. So that's going to be the black blocks. A white block is allow all, and then these green blocks are allow only. You could do block only as well, putting in what specific services you do not want to go through those specific zones. For this example, we have allow only HTTPS, SMTP, HTTP, ICMP, FTP, and SSH. These can be configured to whatever your best practice is for your enterprise or your company. And this just gives you an easy visualization of what your rules actually are and what stance you actually have. Later on in the demo, we're going to go into a little bit more automation of pushing firewall rules, and this actually comes into play. The automation will actually check this USP, or unified security policy, to make sure that it fits with your standards. The other section I want to talk about is PCI regulations. Within the TUFIN appliance, they actually have built-in regulations. And as we can see here, I ran it against one of my ASAs, and it's going to tell me everything that I pass on and everything that I fail on. If we look at something that I failed on, it's going to give me every single rule that is a violation, and it's going to give me the mitigation for each one of those rules. With that, I will hand it back to you, Anthony.
All right, thank you. And just to make sure you can see my slide and not my speaker notes, right?
Yes.
All right, so your whole objective with the FPLM is one, obviously making sure that you maintain security. You haven't impacted performance and you haven't put any real burden on the operations team. So when you build your program, those are your tenants, your core tenants. We want to remove inefficient, obsolete policies and enhance security. Simple, right? Everybody wants and needs to do that. But how many of us have set up a firewall rule 5 years ago, decommissioned the application or the system that the rule was created for, and then never deleted the rule? This gives you a very simple and effective way to go through that process. In our demos, we're showing you 3 firewalls. We have customers, 50, 100, multi-vendor, different context. You know, some are internet facing, some are not, extranets. There's a lot of different pieces out there. Even if you're moving out into the cloud and you have firewalls all over the place, or even just some kind of a host level firewall, like in your microservices or something to that effect. The same objectives or the same tenets apply. You need to be secure. You do not want to impact performance, and you need to make operations as streamlined as possible. Let's go through a couple more use cases. Those that I've highlighted are, we're going to demonstrate these as opposed to just talking about them. But when you start out building your program, you have to understand the use case and the requirement. If it's compliance, your requirements are going to be pretty straightforward. But then there's the use case. You know, do we need to automate firewall administration? Do we need to increase performance and reduce costs? I think the answer is always yes to that one. Reducing risk, obviously. Visibility, it's always wanted, but not necessarily always available. Typically, you have to go through the gatekeeper or the firewall administrator. No offense to the firewall administrator, but they're typically very protective of their systems. And what this allows you to do is give people access to the platform without giving them a direct log on to the platform. So they can see everything they need, looking from outside the fishbowl to understand what just happened, even though they may not understand the configuration. What they will understand is they created a policy, you implemented a change, it met the policy and passed the risk management process. It simplifies everything. Whether you're looking at DevOps automation or enriching your SIM data, whether you need to implement some kind of separation of duties for compliance or just for the sake of managing multiple teams, whether you currently have a periodic review, quarterly, biannually, weekly, change auditing, whatever's in case, whatever applies. These are all different use cases that you want to consider. When we're talking about achieving regulatory compliance, this is the short list. I'm not going to go through every one of them, but you can understand that there are clearly a lot of regulations. And if you are a regulated organization, the pain of dealing with some of these is pretty high. So you want to reduce that pain, reduce the cost, and obviously reduce the time. There's a lot of organizations that we've worked with that do have a practice in place, but they can't seem to meet the requirement deadlines. So when they have to achieve compliance, they have a process, they have people associated, and they have platforms in place, but they can't seem to get there on time. They're consistently behind. There's always a backlog. So having an FPLM program really helps you streamline operations and hopefully get rid of the backlog if it's designed properly. And that is not just the platform, that is everything from RACI to processes to the platform. We're gonna go through a couple more demos. We keep talking about streamlining things. Christian's gonna show you some basic automated workflows that could easily be delegated to help desk, DevOps, junior admins, firewall admins. So they're always following the same process and collecting business justification and approvals. So we'll show you an access request with a risk assessment built into it so that you don't have an engineer standing there trying to read command line interface settings. We'll run through a workflow for rule recertification. Take that use case that I talked about before where rules or servers need to be decommissioned after a host or an application has been decommissioned in your environment, you would probably want to shut the door behind it. So Christian, let you take it away on the demos.
All right, so we're in the other half of the appliance. It's called Secure Change, and this is where we're going to do our automated workflows. So essentially what we do, say I'm one of the business owners and I need access to a new server that I just created. So we can do access to new server. And the source address is 192.168.100.100. And the destination is 10.0.10.100. And I'm actually going to go into the advanced features. This will make it a little bit easier for those delegated tasks. Essentially what I can do is go into my suggested targets, and it's going to give me exactly what target I should add to here. So I'm going to add that and reply. And then I'm going to go into these services right here and say it's TFTP. We'll go ahead and search for that, add it here. And now my ticket is completely done. We can add a comment that actually makes it to the firewall rule itself, but it's not necessary. Right here, we can see that we need a business justification, and this is a mandatory field. So if we look back later in time, we can go ahead and know exactly why this firewall rule was implemented. So new server, we'll go ahead and submit this. And if we go over to task, this gets shipped off to a business approval task. And essentially what we do here is one of our managers goes in, looks at the rule, makes sure it's actually needed, and we can approve or reject the rule here. So I'm going to go ahead and approve this. And then we go into our next step, which is risk analysis, and then we're actually going to design the rules. So we'll click on our risk analysis. It's going to go ahead and decide according to our unified security policy if this is a part of compliance. We can see on the side here that it's actually in red. So if I click on it, it's going to tell me why it's violating it. So DMZ1 to servers is block all. So nothing can go from DMZ1 to servers, and DMZ1 to offices is also block all. If this is a rule that needs to be put in place, down below we can disregard the risk manually, and this is going to be notated then as well. So we will disregard this risk, go back to our ticket, and we're going to do our designer. And what this is actually going to do is give me every single rule that I'm going to need for the firewall, and it's going to generate them all automatically for me. So if we use this drop down here, we can see where it's being placed. We can modify it if we need it higher in the rule base. We can change the logging level, and we can add a comment as well. So I'll close out of here, click done, and we are going to go ahead and go to the last step, which is actually implementation. So first what we'll do is we'll go to our designer. We will use our drop down, and we'll go to our commands. And these are all the commands that it's actually going to write. We have two different options. We can update the device from the appliance itself. It'll do it automatically for us. Or if we're more comfortable, we can copy the commands, go onto that ASA, and then paste them in. So I'm just going to update the device here. You can see there's green check marks by everything. We'll close out of here. And if we give it a second here, we should be able to verify that the change is actually there. There we go. So green check mark for verifier, and we can see the path that it took and the rule that was implemented. The next portion, as Anthony mentioned, if you are going to be removing servers or you're under compliance, you may want to do some rule recertification. So we use this tool called the policy browser, which will allow us to search our rule base for certain rules, or we can display all the rules like I have right now. And what we do is we can select this rule. We can tell right now it is not certified, doesn't have any data in it, so we can add it to our ticket. Let me refresh this quick. And once we get into here, we can go to recertify our rules. And it's going to push us over to the other half where we're going to actually fill out our ticket. So here's the rule we want to recertify. Our application name is SolarWinds. And our application owner is the TFTP team, for example. We'll go ahead and submit the request. And then it's going to be passed to a handler to go ahead and recertify or decertify the rules. So what we do is we select here, click certify. It's going to pop up for the business owner. So we'll fill out this information and a comment. So this rule.
Hey, Christian, you might want to slow down just a little bit, just because the screen refresh is a little slow.
Okay. So this rule was marked as still in use. So we have a reason and we have the business owner here. We can set the certification expiration date. So whether your compliance is 90 days or 180 days, you have to review your firewall base. We can set that here, or you can set it to a specific date. So I'm going to click OK on here. Update the metadata. And I'll close out of that. We're done with this ticket now. If we go back to Secure Track and just refresh the screen, we can see this rule right here is what we had. We have TFTP as the business owner. It's certified. The data was certified, and the date that it's going to expire, the date we're going to have to recertify it. And if you see here, we also have a ticket ID in place as well. So this ties to ticket 31 in secure change, so we can easily reference those reasons, that comment that I put in there. The final automation workflow that I want to show you guys today is the server decommission. So I'll create a new request for server decommission. And the IP address that we're going to be decommissioning is 10.1.0.130. We'll give a business justification. This is an old server. We just need to go ahead and decommission it. We will submit that. And it's going to go to that same business approval that the access request did. So our manager is going to review it, make sure that that's the actual IP address that we are going to decommission. It will approve it and give a reason. This will be handed off to a tech or an engineer to go ahead and complete the design and impact analysis step. So if we click on impact analysis, it's going to show me every single firewall rule that this is actually going to impact. So essentially for this change, we are going to delete 4 different firewall rules. So this gives an easy way to view it, make sure that we didn't miss a rule when going ahead and decommissioning. Next, we'll go to the designer. It's going to give us every single rule that we're going to remove and tell me exactly how to remove them. So now that designer is done, we'll go ahead to the final stage, which is the implementation portion. We'll go into our designer. We'll go into our commands. And then finally, we can update our device. All the commands were successful. And we're finished our workflow. So you can tell through these 3 workflows how automation can make it easy. You can task delegate to a junior level engineer, and they can go ahead and make those changes for you. So with that, I'll hand it back to you, Anthony.
Thanks, Christian. All right. So we're just going to keep going here. We're going to talk a little bit about the people aspect of it. So we talked about people, process, platform. Typically, when you buy software, it doesn't come with people. You may build full-time employees into your CapEx or your OpEx, but often that work is dumped on additional people. And typically, you would assume it's just the firewall administrator, but often that is not the case in enterprise environments. So what we do with our customers is we sit down with them and we build out, whether they're project-related tasks or program-related tasks. We build a racing matrix. This is a standard template. You can download it off the internet. The contents of which are relative to that requirements and use case building that you did early on in the analysis phase. So we put this matrix together so that everyone knows what their role or responsibility is. It's very important when you're doing delegated administration. And it's also very important when you're talking about accountability. So who's responsible, who's accountable, who's consulted, who's informed, and there's one other, which is S for support. So it's important to understand with all the different teams, whether it's the project manager, the program manager, your GRC team, governance, risk and compliance, engineering, IR, identity, network, you get the general idea, and audit, last but not least. So think about the organizational impact as you're building your program. You have to think about the business, obviously. You have to think about the regulators, auditors. How does this impact support? Firewall administration was the obvious target. Dumping it all on them makes them less likely to follow a process. How are you going to interact with operations, and how does it interact with DevOps or SecOps or DevSecOps for that matter? And then obviously end users are why most of us have jobs. So it's important to make sure that the impact to them is also understood. So the racing matrix is critical to making sure that you've covered all lines of business. Now the next part is really how. What does it take to implement a program like this? We're going to walk through the project and the program development process that we use. There's more than one way to skin a cat, but this works well for us. So first, we go through the project phase. We identify requirements and success criteria. It's very important. How do you know you achieved the goal or accomplished the mission? You need success criteria. Review regulations and our corporate network security policies, assuming they exist. If they don't exist, that's going to be a struggle. You're going to want to make sure those things are documented and clearly understood by everyone and agreed upon so that you can move forward. Documenting the inventory, often security, not the firewall administrators, but security engineers, IR teams, architecture teams, they are not always fully aware of the inventory due to lack of asset management or something to that effect. So you want to document that inventory and also find a way to make sure that all new devices are included in that process. And then we go through the build, test, deploy phase for all the infrastructure components. We socialize and standardize the USP. USP is a term we're using here relative to TUFIN, but again, your policy has to be visually represented in some way, shape, or form that's easy to understand. Then we would go through and import the policy, import the devices, configure alerting and monitoring. We define, build, and test all the workflows. So that's the project phase of the engagement. And then we would move through the program. So the program really is the ultimate deliverable. It's not just the hardware and software that we're putting in place. So we define and document the schedule. How often are you going to perform audits? We define and document the scope. What's going to occur during that review period? What inventory will be targeted during that inventory? And then we align the inventory to the schedule. For example, if you break your year down into quarters and you have 100 firewalls, you can do the math. You're going to have 25 per quarter. You can also do that math to say that the audit process, maybe it takes 30 days. So in a 30-day period, you have to get 25 firewalls done. It's one a day. And if you look at your configs and realize that's impossible, you need to expand your schedule or increase your FTEs to stay accountable. That's really just based on someone doing the audit. When you have the USP in place, you can avoid future violations, but cleaning up anything that's existing or legacy, that's a work effort. Then we go through and establish a working group, which is typically defined by the RACI. So if you're going to have a periodic, particularly quarterly or biannual or annual audit review, you're going to want to make sure you have everyone who needs to be there in the meeting, basically getting all the right people in the room. And then we determine the deliverables and the schedule for deliverables. For example, we'll go through the process here in a minute. Here's a before snapshot. Here's an after snapshot. Here's all the change controls that occurred during that process. And here's all the documentation and tickets to support it. Then establishing a repository and retention for artifacts. How long do you need to keep these audits? And where are you going to store them so that they're always available, as opposed to chasing down the last person who might have used it? And we're going to move quickly again. Last step in the FPLM program is obviously operations. You have the project, you have the program, and now that you have those two pieces in place, how do you actually use it? So we define and document the processes and the workflows, not so much the automated workflows, but the workflows for the program. We flush out any service management integration, whether it's ServiceNow or whatever you choose to use, service desk, it's all relative. We go through the security monitoring, alerting, and reporting process to make sure that all the right artifacts are delivered to all the right people with all the right information. We go through the process of assigning role-based access control and delegated permissions. That way, you don't need to log into the firewall with your TACACS account or whatever authentication you're using, and you can still see what you need to see without overly excessive access. And then last but not least, establish any other integrations, whether it's security orchestration and automation, SIM integration, or any kind of REST API that you may have in place for tooling. We then go through more detailed analysis. As we talked about, there's different phases. There's the project, there's the program, there's operations. So how many firewalls do we have? You know, what's the make, model, purpose? What's configured? Why did changes occur? Who's making the changes? What changed? All these things we want to be able to make sure that we can answer, not just how many firewalls do we have, but what information do we need to collect from these firewalls? We then go through and do a detailed site survey where we assess the environment and make sure that everything that is needed is in place. Accounts, you know, ACLs, all the different components, obviously licensing, things like that. And then also get a detailed inventory where we capture not just the device name or the context or the type. We get the IP addresses, rules, things like that. Do full detailed analysis of the existing inventory so that we know what we're bringing into the environment to manage. And obviously more detailed specs. So what else are we looking at? What's currently configured? We look at the rule base across the board. Are there missing explicit rules? Are there uncommented rules? Rules with no log tracking? Overly permissive? Any type rules? I'm not going to read every one of these to you, but you can get the general idea. We're going to go through and look at the configurations for best practices. And when we say best practices, these are the things we're talking about. So we talk about security, we talk about performance, and we talk about operations, right? So duplicates, empty service groups, just sloppy firewall management. Everybody gets distracted. Everyone makes mistakes. This is how you check yourself. And then we look at performance. So are your ACLs or your firewall rules in an order that is optimal for performance? So if a rule is too far down on the list, assuming that it's processing serially, then you may have rules that never get hit, or you may have rules that have a high hit count that are very low on the list. So having this program in place and having the tooling and the processes in place to review this will tell you if you are getting optimal performance, and it gives visibility to everyone, not just the firewall admin. And other things like in your firewall configuration, you may have the ability to create a description, but it doesn't necessarily tell you who the technical owner is, or the business owner, or the application, or the system name. So having a place to apply that information to your devices or to your configurations without inundating the config and making it bloated. So we'll go through the demo. We'll talk about best practices. We'll talk about hit counts and ACL ordering, and I'll transfer that over to Christian.
All right. So as Anthony said, this is more about if your firewalls are best practice. So what they have inside the appliance is actually a best practice report. And if I go ahead and edit this, we'll go over here, and we can see there is a ton of different options we can select here. Anything from missing cleanup rules to duplicate host to rule order performance. This particular device is not a checkpoint device, so I go ahead and unselect this down here. But we're going to go ahead and run this report and see how my ASAV stacks up to industry best practice. So we can see here, it went through, it analyzed my firewall, checked everything out, and we can see I have a couple different things I can do better. So if it's missing explicit cleanup rules, it tells me exactly what ACLs need to add a explicit, deny any. my list of uncommented rules. It's going to go ahead and give me inactive rules. So if there is a rule that is shadowed, redundant, hasn't been used in X amount of days, say a year, it's going to go ahead and show up in this list. So I can know, hey, that rule doesn't actually need to be there. I can go ahead and remove that. We're also going to show unattached network objects. So we can see here, these 4 objects are never referenced in an actual access control list. So there is no harm in actually removing these, making sure my firewall is as clean as can be. And then as Anthony mentioned, we can also look at performance. So if we look at these rules down here, these 2 rules are hit a ton, but they are below 25% of the rule base. So if we go ahead and move these up in the list, we can get better performance out of our firewall from this. So the report can be ran just to give us suggestions and a starting point on how to clean up our rule base and make sure that we don't have overly permissive rules. And I will hand it back to you then, Anthony.
Oh man, I didn't get to swallow my water yet. So a little fast for me. All right, so again, when we're building out the FPLM program, we're going through analysis and we're looking at the processes. So process, this is obviously a very simplified process because it had to fit on my slide. So the first thing we're doing is running an audit report. We're reviewing the findings. That initial report we save as HTML or PDF, it's arbitrary, but that is our initial artifact. So you see the yellow and the green, this is our before and after. And we have a basic feedback loop here. So we go from running the report, capturing that data, review the findings, prioritize them, because typically if you have a lot, you're gonna have to figure out which ones have the most impact. Like performance would be the obvious, security would be the next, and then operations would be the cleanup, like uncommented rules and things like that. So you prioritize that way. Then you go through remediation. So if you do have something that's high priority or high risk, you're obviously going to remediate that, or direct impact of performance, you're going to want to go through there. So identify the changes, create the change order request, which is typically your ticket in your ITSM platform. You're going to test those changes, go through some form of risk assessment to make sure that it aligns with your policy, which is what we showed you in that earlier part of the demo. Update that change control with that data, deploy those changes, and then rerun the audit report when you're finished the entire FPLM audit. And your final deliverable would be your post remediation report. So you start with your before and your after, and that's how you get there. Again, this is simplified for the sake of the presentation, but this is what we do with the customers. Cypher RACI, we go through and identify all of the processes that are associated so nothing is missed. Come on, PowerPoint. There we go. So other deliverables and artifacts in that project and in the program are obviously setting up syslog and your SIM indexes, making sure that we're not filling them with junk, especially if you're paying a tax on the platform you're using for a SIM. We don't want to inundate your ingestion or index rates. We go through and evaluate and build, if they don't exist, system change and configuration management auditing processes, best practices reporting, which Christian demonstrated. Weekly or daily change auditing, we'll show you that as well. As you noticed when I did the first part of the demo, I showed you the audit log and those reports. And those reports can be sent out to the team or sent out to a shared mailbox or whatever the case may be, or sent directly to the SIM. So going through and building up weekly or daily change processes, quarterly reviews for external firewalls. So you may have a high priority process or high priority review for externally facing firewalls as opposed to internal or extranet related firewalls that are used for segmentation with NSX or something like that. So from a biannual review, we may look at your partner connections. Maybe they're B2B, maybe they're the extended edge, whatever the case may be. And if you have STIG or RMF requirements, we would go through and build those deliverables and artifacts as well. So we talk about monitoring. What do we have? We're looking at inventory. Did it change? We have an alert. Who made the change? It has to be tied to identity. We need that accountability. So what was changed? Does it adhere to the policy? We showed and demonstrated that. Was it authorized or unauthorized? Building in that workflow where you have the business owner, and maybe you can even add another step where an architect would review it or an engineer would review it before an admin would push it. Does it follow our policy or best practices? You can run the best practices report before and after at any time. And obviously, if it impacts performance, we will be able to show you that as well. There's more to it, but these are simple bullet points. So from a demo perspective, we're going to talk about or present, the audit trail. We're also going to show you some things relative to SIM enrichment using REST APIs. So whether you're hitting the firewall directly, the SIM directly, or your FPLM infrastructure directly, you may need more data that is not in the system. And because it's an off-the-shelf product, any off-the-shelf product may not have built-in reports to give you everything you need. So we'll go through a couple demos real quick. And hopefully all my sessions are still up. So we talked about, what do we got here? Audit trail. Let's do that. We know that all the revisions have been tracked by device and we know their number. I'm going to show you how to pull that data out in a custom script. We have scripts in both Python and PowerShell. Really, it's arbitrary what programming language you want to use or scripting language. And then so that's your revision status on the firewalls. And this is your audit trail on the actual platform. So if something was changed, there is a paper trail to support it, which can easily be reported, changed for dates, things like that. So this is the audit trail and information there that's there for accountability. So basically you have time, who did it, when they did it, where they did it, why they did it, and what they did. Let's move on to some of the automation. It's not really automation because I'm going to demonstrate it manually. So first what I have here is a PowerShell script. And what this does effectively is, because this is a demo environment, I had to build in this awesome security feature where I skip the cert check, not highly recommended. But if you're dealing with test environments and things like that, that code is pretty effective. With PowerShell, I did not use the request library from Python. I just used the basic invoke web requests. And what I'm doing here, and here's the pseudocode, I'm going to get a list of all the devices that are in the FPLM program. I'm going to respond back with the device ID, which is its number. I need that, the device name, and the IP address. And after that, I'm going to loop through all the devices, look at all the revisions and the actual configuration on the firewall. So I'm going to pull back every change that occurred, and I'm going to pull back the actual configuration right out of the system. And I could write this data to the SIM, to a log file, anywhere you want. In this case, I'm going to write them to a console. I'm going to build the URI or URL string that I'm using for my REST API request. And the reason I mentioned before that I need that device ID and the revision IDs is because when I build this string, I'm going to need that information. So for each device, I'm going to get the globally unique revision number. So that device had a revision and that revision has a number. And then I'm going to get the running config. And then for each revision, I'm going to get the rules. Just simply put, what commands were executed during that revision. So let's clear this out real quick. In this case, you wouldn't be prompted if you were automating, but I'm demonstrating. This could easily be, oop, I did good there, huh? You'll see the screen flashing by. And I'll talk about what you're seeing here. You see here, it's the ASA. Let's stop that real quick. You see that I have ASA1, its device ID, its name, its IP address, Here is a list of the revisions. Here are the revision numbers. So this one had several numbers, but these are all unique IDs. So each unique ID is tied back to that device. And then the rules associated with that revision are listed here in the API. So in this case, these revisions did not have an actual command. It could have been something as simple as a basic logon. But what you see above here, I apologize for that background noise if you can hear that, is the entire configuration. So we know that this firewall had revisions, and we know the firewall device, right? So here's ASA, here's the ASA version. We've got all the configuration information that we need. The entire config has been dumped and could be put wherever you need to. I recommend securing that. Shows me all my objects, shows me my certs, you know, the general configuration of the firewall. It's arbitrary which one it is. It shows me that device and the changes. So I'm going to run this again and just let it finish and move on to my other script. So let that run for a minute or two. What we got here? All right, so this is a Python script that we're using because, again, it doesn't really matter what language you're working with. And we're doing basically the same thing. We're going to connect up using the request library. We're going to specify our variables. There's obviously better ways to do this. This is for demonstration purposes. But automation is something we spend a lot of time on, and we're dealing with XML in this case, not JSON. So if you write or automate against APIs, it'll make a difference which type of response you're getting, whether it's JSON or XML. So the first thing we do is we create a log file. In this case, I am going to write the log file. I'm going to do a request. And then from there, I'm going to take all of that data so that I can parse it and pull out the stuff that's interesting, as opposed to my last script that I demoed, where it was kind of just clunky data. What this one's going to do is basically go get the same thing and identify the fields that are interesting to me, like the device ID, the name, the IP address, and spit that information out, and then go get the configuration, which is still clunky, but you'll see here in Python that it's not as clunky. And then I'll go get the revisions. I'll find out what the ID number was for the revision, the admin that did it, the time and the date. I'll write all that data to the console. I'll also write it to a log file. And if you want, obviously, you can write it to Splunk or Elk or wherever you want to send that data. So without that, let's just run this. And you'll see the data is obviously formatted a little better than the last one. So here I'm just getting the device ID, the name, the IP address, every revision. And as this runs, you'll see who did it and what command they ran. So you see there you have outside, extended permit, TCP/NE. These are all arbitrary ACLs that were just thrown out there. What revision and what command was actually run, because maybe that's all I care about. Who did what command did they run? Kind of boring watching that screen scroll by, but you get the idea. So we can format the output and clean it up any way that we need to make sure that we're getting the artifacts that are necessary. Last demo, as soon as I figure out where my SSH session is. So what I have here is my CentOS platform running Ansible. I don't have Ansible Tower spun up, I'm just running Ansible. And I created a YAML file and an inventory so that I can run this playbook and pull back information that I find interesting. So in this case, we'll take a look here. And what I'm going to do is connect up to the ASA, and I'm going to run some commands. These could be any commands that I need. I'm going to show version, show run SSH. Maybe I'm trying to figure out what management protocols are enabled. I want to look at NAT rules or write NAT rules, whatever the case is. And I want to look at the object mapping, and then obviously NAT. These are all for demo purposes. These could be any set of commands that you're looking for. So I have my Ansible playbook. Let's take a look at my inventory. I have 3 firewalls. You can see my super secret passwords using network CLI, and I'm targeting ASA. That makes a big difference in Ansible. Don't try to use the iOS libraries. All right, so let's run it. when I run this, I don't have to, I could specify these in my variables, but I'm going to actually have it prompt me for the enable password. So I'm going to provide that just for sake of purposes, for demonstration purposes. And you'll notice I use the -VVV option. I use that just so that you can see all of the output. If you're not looking for all the blue fancy technical data, you don't need that information. So it goes and connects. It's running all my commands. It's going to spit out what was successful, what the commands were. Again, I can write these to a log file. I can call my playbook through Python, whatever the case may be. Okay. Wait for it. There we go. Okay, in that case, something failed. More than likely it failed because I had an error in my command. So I'll run it again with a different YAML file that I know works. Excuse me. And then I'll move on so you don't have to watch me poking around with my Ansible box. So it's running my plays, it's making the connections, and it outputs the commands that I was looking for. So I got my NAT policies, I got my different configurations. I know that all the plays ran, so I had 2 plays run on 3 firewalls, came back with all my data. And in this case, I'm using Ansible directly on the firewall as opposed to the FPLM platform, in this case, which was Tufin. You'll find that no matter what platform you pick, there are going to be things that you want or need that are not available. So having options and having tooling around and the knowledge around this process is important. So we grabbed the whole config, we grabbed our telnet information, we grabbed our SSH information, console information, and any features as well as the NAT stuff. So I basically did a show run and pulled back some data. So here's my NAT information. I know that the REST API is running on this particular ASA. And then I have my object mapping. And the last one it failed because I tried to use show object inline, and I probably had a typo. But you get the general idea. So let's go back. So what I was showing you there with Ansible was configuration validation. Let's say you have a standard config that needs to exist on all firewalls. And you can pull the data from your FPLM platform, or you can pull it from the firewall directly and grab the configuration settings that you're looking for by various show commands or reading each line by line and checking it against a known good. And if you have a failure, you report, send to the SIM, send an alert from the SIM, and even open a ticket through automation, which is pretty effective. Okay, so what tools are available? As you can see here, I clearly have an art degree. We're talking about simple components. You have a requester, they go through ITSM platform. That ITSM platform, Service Desk, ServiceNow, could be easily integrated with your FPLM program so that that request comes directly to your FPLM platform. From there, the firewall admin or robot, depending on which one you're employing, using automation like Jenkins, Ansible, PowerShell, Python. I could run down the whole list here. They're going to go through the process of pushing those configs. Those configs are going to write to syslog. A syslog could be your SIM. Then it's going to go back to the FPLM and say, okay, those changes were executed, update ticket, send the syslog data to the SIM. And the data consumer could be audit, firewall admin, firewall team, security engineering, incident response, whatever the case may be. Typically, when you're building this program, you want to make sure you pick a platform that supports as many vendors as possible. We picked Tufin. Again, there are others. Making sure that you're dealing with the hybrid environment, whether it's cloud, Kubernetes, OpenShift, Palo Alto, any firewall platform that you're looking for, even VMware NSX for that matter. You want to make sure that you have a platform that meets all of your near-term, or short-term, near-term, and long-term requirements. We picked Tufin because of the integration and support for things like DevOps and CI/CD tools and pipelines, as well as ITSM integration, scripting and automation capabilities, and integration with other third-party tools. We demonstrated secure track and secure change, all of which have a REST API. And then if you're looking at hybrid cloud environments, which we didn't talk about, You can use secure cloud where you're looking at your microservices and things like that in greater detail, things that are not on-prem. Any way you shake it, you're still going to have the unified security policy applied. You're going to have the ability to analyze those components and produce data that is relevant to compliance, whether it's security, operations, or performance. I'd hate the term single pane of glass, but it would be nice to have another pane of glass that allowed you to look at all of your firewall instances or firewall configurations, or really network security policy configurations if you take it to the next level for all the different appliances and vendors that are in your environment. Again, that's why we picked this platform. CDA, we talked a little bit about TUFIN. We talked more about how we build the programs and the process that we take. We offer services. We are a consulting organization. We take you full life cycle from a project, consulting project perspective, and analysis, design, build, test, and knowledge transfer. I'm not going to read all the bullet points below, but you can imagine those phases all apply to FPLM or any firewall operation you need to address. From when we engage on an FPLM project, there are a lot of deliverables. Typically starts out with analysis and assessment, requirements development, the RACI as we just discussed, the process design and documentation, platform design and documentation, process deployment, platform deployment, and then automation as needed. We also offer managed services, whether it's a full FPLM program and managing it end to end, or periodic firewall audits and remediation, or even managed firewall services. We support multiple platforms. If you're interested, we could definitely talk about that. And from a pen test remediation perspective, often the pen test may occur and you need to go fix it. Maybe you're short on staff. Maybe you are underqualified for whatever reason to fix the problem. We can help with that. And then last but not least, the staff augmentation. As you get into a more mature posture from a security perspective, we provide staff augmentation relative to networking, firewalls, operations, and troubleshooting. What we do is we recruit talent. We train them specifically for your environment. We present them to you in what I call an interview on steroids, where they demonstrate the skills. They don't talk about them. They will show you what they know and how they do it. And then from there, we would take that resource and assign them to you for a period of time. If you like the resource, you can keep them. Okay, that's all that I have. Back to you, Brian.
Thank you, Anthony. Let me bring up some of the questions that have been asked here. One is, how is a connection made from the console to the backend servers?
Yeah, so you can do that through SSH or SNMP or Telnet. I don't think anybody's really using Telnet anymore, but with regard to the FPLM program or platform we demonstrated, it was SSH. And if it wasn't SSH, it was REST API using SSL TLS. Hopefully that answered your question.
Yes, yes. What about running compliance-specific reports?
So as Christian demonstrated, and that question may have been asked before, maybe we need some clarity, but Christian demonstrated like a SOX compliance report where it basically looked at the config and said, these are all good, or these are all out of compliance. And we could share that again if we need to answer that question further.
Okay, great. Let's see, one other question we have here. What if you propose a change that violates the risk as you define in the policy?
So obviously when you walk through the workflow, you saw that there's multiple checkpoints where the business owner would approve it, or the technical owner might approve it, or even, network architecture, network engineering, or security might approve it. They will all be prompted that there is a policy violation, and they have the option to dismiss it, but it's going to show up on the compliance report. And if you don't want them to push it, then you would decline it in the approval process.
Okay, great. Thank you. And looks like I have one last question on my end. Looks like it's TUFIN specific. Can you run a discovery to find any all devices configurations in your environment to bring into the TUFIN console?
So gathering inventory is often an interesting challenge. In a lot of cases, we've used spreadsheets, we've run scan tools, we've done a lot of different techniques to get that inventory. I can tell you that most firewalls are properly configured are not going to give up the data you need to find them. So you typically will look through the gateways, look through the routers, and look for existing inventory. So things like SolarWinds or whatever other tools you're using, asset management. Otherwise, it can be a painful process getting that inventory, which is why we make sure the site survey initially, before you pick a platform, again, throw TUFIN out the window on that one. Whatever platform you pick, you're going to need your inventory solid. You're going to need your processes solid. Your policy needs to be at least documented.
Okay, thank you, Anthony. I think that wraps up all the questions we have now. The link for the survey has been posted to the chat. Everybody that's on this webinar right now will be receiving an email as well with the same information. So unless anybody has anything else, I think we're good here, and we'd like to thank anybody for attending. Anthony and Christian, do you have anything you'd like to add before we close this up?
You get me every time I hit the mute button.
No problem.
I have no further questions, Your Honor.
Okay. Well, thank you, Anthony. Thank you, Christian. Thank you for everybody for attending. And we look forward to having you at our next Lunch and Learn. Everybody, have a great day.